Hello. Diagnosis. Multiple diagnosis. No diagnosis. EHCPs. We're getting mixed messages again. Over the last sort of 3 months, the number of people are saying, I need to get an ADHD assessment because I want an EHCP, Educational Healthcare Plan. And I say, but you don't need it. If you want an EHCP, you don't need to have a diagnosis of ADHD. No, well, we've got a diagnosis of autism, but they think that he's got ADHD, and I need the evidence so that I can get an educational healthcare plan. Well, okay, so brilliant. Well, I'm pleased you've got a diagnosis of autism. Do you need a diagnosis for ADHD then? Because we could be talking about comorbidity, which means there's more than just one diagnosis within the diagnosis. And the school have to accept that, because we're not going to be dealing with the diagnosis. We're going to be dealing with the presentation. What is the presentation that is being delivered from the child at that minute in time? So are they just not being able to settle in the class? They're being disruptive, they're being impulsive, etc., etc. So I'm going to have to deal with that as a teacher, as a school. But I don't need a diagnosis to tell me that I have to deal with that. I can see that that's roughly what we're dealing with. And I can make adjustments, and I can put things in place. And if an EHCP, I'll put it down into the paperwork to sort of say that they are inattentive, they are hyperactive, they are whatever the case may be. But to then sort of say, go and get a diagnosis, it's ludicrous, because we don't need it unless the activity that the child's producing is being aggressive, is causing him real stress and anxious behaviours, then we may need to medicate. If we need to medicate, that's different. We would need to have a diagnosis of ADHD to allow medication. But that's not the school's place to say. That would be the doctor's. So if the school is saying this is what's happening, we can go to the doctor and sort of say, look, do you think we need to be looking at this for medication? And they might say, oh, maybe we should be going down that road. But it's not the school to say, to get an EHCP, I want further evidence, and to get that evidence, go and get a diagnosis. Because to me, whether it be you've got an ADHD and they want an autism diagnosis, or a sensory assessment diagnosis, whatever, it's not necessary. Nowhere in the SEND Code of Practice does it state that you need to have a diagnosis to get help. So the EHCP, and it doesn't even say in the EHCP anywhere that you have to have this evidence. It says you have to have a diagnosis. It helps. You haven't got to have it, but if you get a diagnosis and you have, you may be behind in your lessons, or you may be struggling socially, these sort of things automatically should entitle you to an assessment. So when you're put forward, they shouldn't be turned around and say, no, you don't meet the criteria, because if you've already got the diagnosis of whatever, whether it be one or whatever, then you should meet the criteria, full stop. Local authorities may try and make that a little bit harder, but it is illegal. Then we've got where you haven't got a diagnosis, but the school suspects that you may have issues. The SEND Code of Practice, again, doesn't say you must go and get a diagnosis. It states if you suspect that that child is having trouble in certain areas, then you must do whatever the particular issue is. And if that's causing them from being behind, so we're going to put certain things in place to find out what little bits of help we can get, maybe put them in the SEND Code of Practice, put a plan of action together to try and get them a little bit more additional help. And if that doesn't help and it's not working, then we should be looking at an educational healthcare plan. It says, but we need to do some activities and some plans to get to that stage, and a do review, I think it's called, assessment, and that might take 6 months. But if the child's really struggling, kicking off or whatever, it hasn't got to. It's good to gather the information, it's good to get all of that, But we can put in place is that here's the reason. The school can put a really good comprehensive detailed thing as to why it needs to happen, even if you haven't got the plan, do and review. Because at the end of the day, it's down to what is going to be right for our child to get an education and to get the same education as everybody else. So I just wanted to come on and sort of say, look, schools are asking parents to get diagnosis when diagnosis isn't necessary. If you need a diagnosis, that's fine. But if you've already got a diagnosis, then we can just say, my child is neurodivergent, therefore I need the help in these areas. I don't need 6 different diagnoses in order for me to get an EHCP. We have got this proof that we have got neurodivergent, and certain situations are going to cause certain issues, and this is the area that is causing us, so therefore I would need it. I would also like to, at this point, because I can hear teachers and schools screaming, but you're not entitled to one. A diagnosis does not entitle you to an educational healthcare plan. So you may get the diagnosis, and then we may put the information forward, and you'll still be rejected for having an education care plan. It's not an automatic right to have an educational healthcare plan. There has to be reasons for that. We can help you understand that. I can give you information. I can sort of put questions to you to sort of say, is this here, is that happening, is this happening? Then it sounds as though we should have one, or actually that doesn't warrant that, but what you do need is this. So we have to be realistic as to why is an educational healthcare plan the right plan, but that's looking at everything that's gone before. But it might be that we've just recently been given a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, and somebody has just said to you, oh, you could get an EHCP now, and then that's thinking, oh yeah, I get an EHCP. No, we're not entitled to them just because of a diagnosis or whatever, or because we're struggling. We're entitled to them because of what the struggle is, and we have to be clear of what that is, which is why they talk about we need a plan, do and review. They have to show, but sometimes you haven't got to wait. You don't need to wait because it's very, very obvious. But I, as a parent, as a chair of PACT, and this is my view and my view only, I feel that sometimes things are put in place to slow the process down. I've said this publicly, I've said it individually, the authorities know that this is my thoughts, so I'm not saying anything new if they do see it, but I do feel that certain tactics are put in place to slow processes down. I haven't understood completely yet why, but it's not right. But we have to be also aware as parents, it's not first and foremost a right to have an EHCP. It's not first and foremost right to have a DLA. We have to show that there is reasoning and everything else behind it. And listening to things like this, talking to other parents and finding out what is it that constitutes this help and everything else. That's what gets us the right things with the right information and the right wordings once you know what the issues are. So schools need to stop telling parents to go and get a diagnosis so that we can get you an EHCP, because you might do all of that and still not get an EHCP. And we have to start looking at what is the child presenting at that time, and that's what we're going to deal with, and things could be a lot easier. Thank you.